In this video, I'm going to talk about the difference between primary and secondary sources. Both are good sources to use, but they serve different purposes. Primary sources are original artifacts created at the time under study or by someone with direct experience of that time. They can take the form of diaries, letters, graffiti, interviews, and more. Secondary sources are documents based off of primary sources or other secondary sources. They're generally written well after the fact and often take the form of journal articles, books, and websites. I'd just like to mention tertiary sources. These are usually encyclopedias and dictionaries that combine a lot of secondary sources into a general overview. Now, some basic warnings about the different sources. Just because it's super old doesn't mean it's a primary source. Make sure that you look at the date of the source. Just because it's a secondary source doesn't mean that it's a scholarly source. Always consider the credentials of the author or publisher. And finally, tertiary sources should not be cited in your paper, although they're great to look at for good background information. Different primary sources serve different purposes. Raw data gives you information building blocks, but you need to put it together into a construction that makes sense. You'll often use programs to manipulate the data. Personal narratives like diaries, letters, and autobiographies give you some great insight into one person's perspective, but remember that their perspective may not reflect society's consensus. Cultural artifacts like art, music, and literature can serve as interesting evidence, but they can be difficult to incorporate these sources well. And finally, newspapers and other reports can be excellent sources, but they may give you conflicting perspectives based on their affiliation. Likewise, not all secondary sources are created equal. They can be broadly separated into popular and scholarly sources. Popular sources are generally more fun to read. These contain more images, less citations, and they're often written by journalists or other non-professionals. They can include commercial websites, .coms, blogs, magazines, and pop history books. Scholarly sources, on the other hand, serve the primary purpose of educating readers. They can be difficult to read as they sometimes contain professional jargon because they're written by experts in their fields. Their citations are in-depth, though, and can lead to other sources. These are what you primarily want to use for your papers.